Muy buenos días. That is the extent of my Spanish this morning. I'm not going to inflict my incomprehensible Spanish on you esteemed participants. We have simultaneous translation, as you know. Before I start, I would like to thank a series of institutions and people, first and foremost, for the Public Governance Review. Our main interlocutor institution was and is the Secretaría de Técnica de Planificación, the Planning Secretariat with Minister Molinas, who is here. I'd also like to thank Vice Minister Yasmin Gustal and Vice Minister Emiliano Fernandez, as well as Director General Federico Sosa and his team. I wish to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Paraguay and the Ministry of the Hacienda, as well as the Secretariat for the Función Pública. Minister Peralta is here. They participated consistently over the 18 months in the Public Governance Review process. It is a testament to their intestinal fortitude, but it's a testament to their desire to contribute. And as center of government institutions, we can only thank them for their contribution. And of course, this couldn't have occurred without the support of the European Union. So I thank the Commission for their financial contribution to this Public Governance Review. The PGR was approved in April by the OECD Public Governance Committee following a very rich engagement and dialogue between the OECD member countries represented by their delegates to the PGC and the Paraguayan delegation, which was led by Minister Molinas. It was a virtually unprecedented 2 hours worth of discussion that engaged Minister Molinas and his delegation in various questions of public governance reform, after which delegates approved the review. The review is available. It is public. The Spanish version of the book will be sent to Asunción next month. But in the meantime, you have the Spanish version of the executive summary in the form of the brochure that is on your seats. With that, I wish to begin now. I'm a Luddite. Let's see if this works. Nope. There. So first, let's start with the framework. What is sound public governance? What's good governance? Why is it important? Good governance is a tool. It's a means to an end. It's a means to ensure that governments can identify, anticipate, and respond effectively to the needs of citizens. It's a means to improve the prosperity and well-being of a country and its people. Sound public governance is a set of institutions, rules, and practices that link the state and civil society in a way that determines that public decisions and their implementation are carried out in a transparent, efficient, inclusive, and participatory manner in the public interest. Good public governance, therefore, is not partisan. It is an essential building block for nation building. Why is it important? Well, first and foremost, because it enables governments to anticipate and meet the needs of citizens. It can boost productivity and inclusive economic growth at the national, regional, and local levels. It can lead to sustainable public policies and better services. It can help reduce the costs of providing public services and reduce the public deficit and the public debt. It can help to restore the trust of citizens in the institutions of the state, which are at the same time more receptive and responsible to their needs. Public governance, sound public governance, is the means to realize the strategic vision of a more inclusive and sustainable Paraguay for all Paraguayans. So, the OECD has been working for some time on what we're calling a policy framework for sound public governance. And it articulates around 3 clusters of elements: values, tools, and enablers. And good public governance is the combination of these 3 interconnected elements. The values underpinning sound public governance, relating to transparency, integrity, democracy, the rule of law. Governance tools, including coordination, sound data, the use of data in decision making. And reform enablers, including the skill sets in a strong merit-based civil service. The methodology that we adopted is the same for any and all public governance reviews. Paraguay, as Minister Molinas and others mentioned this morning, asked the OECD for advice on whether the institutions of the executive branch are organized in a way that will deliver on the National Development Plan's strategic objectives for the country and its people. So we examined the institutional arrangements of the government to meet the objectives of the plan in as efficient and effective a way as possible. We looked at the performance and challenges of the whole public sector in Paraguay in light of 5 thematic areas that we discussed and agreed to with Paraguay with the support of the European Union. The review was drafted with the support of peers. That's a hallmark of the methodological approach. We are peer-driven. We bring senior officials from OECD member countries who have faced or are facing the challenges under review in the public governance review of Paraguay. And in this case, we were honored to have senior officials from Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, Poland, and Portugal who worked over the 18 months with us on this review. The recommendations are purely practice-based. It's very important to understand that the OECD is not coming here to tell you what to do. It's simply saying that in OECD countries that have faced or are facing the challenges Paraguay is facing, this is how these countries have tended to address these challenges. And if Paraguay wishes, as it states it wishes, to move closer to OECD standards and practices, Paraguay might consider doing X, Y, and Z as presented in the public governance review. The 5 thematic areas that we looked at are the leadership of the center of government and its capacity to coordinate across administrative silos, the ability to link the National Development Plan and the National Fiscal Framework in a way that can enable decision makers to demonstrate that the decisions it takes on spending are achieving the strategic objectives as laid out in the National Development Plan. Multi-level governance and the relationship between the national government, the departamentos, and municipalities, because in OECD countries at least, anywhere between 55 and 70% of all public expenditures and all service design and delivery are made by subnational governments within national government established frameworks, but spending and the delivery of services, daycare, primary school, hospitals, are made by the regional and local levels of government. So it becomes very important for the national government to have effective coordination capacity to deliver results on the ground in each region. Regions that, like in Paraguay, differ. You have rich regions and poor regions, remote regions, rural and urban. All of that needs to be taken into account in a way that harnesses the strengths and assets of each region so that regions can contribute to national growth while ensuring that citizens, regardless of where they live, have access to a basket of basic public services of comparable standards and quality. The fourth theme was building a strong and professional civil service, and the 5th was how to engage with citizens at all stages in the policy-making cycle through open government policies and principles. The bottom line messages of the review are that during the past few years, particularly led by this government, the outgoing government, Paraguay has made significant advances in all of the review's areas. But challenges persist. Additional efforts could be made to bring the country closer to the standards and practices of the OECD in all of the review's areas. And there is a general necessity to guarantee the sustainability of the advances that have been made over time, both in terms of institutionality and in terms of decision-making capacity, beyond the life of a single government. In other words, there is no magic wand. This doesn't occur overnight. It takes years, if not decades, and therefore a key issue for Paraguay is to sustain momentum for these reforms over the lives of different governments. The review identifies important opportunities based on this assessment to reform institutions and decision-making mechanisms so that the government, in full engagement with citizens and civil society and business, can design better policies and services that meet the necessities of citizens across the entire country. The recommendations of the review are presented with the following objectives: to create awareness across the public sector and in civil society, to continue reforms and to create a political commitment to implement them over time, to sustain this commitment to pursue reforms, and to further strengthen the institutional capacity in Paraguay. Now, our first area is the center of government. So we define the center of government as the institutional arrangements that support the head of government or the head of state, as well as supporting the Council of Ministers, so that together, through the leadership of the head of government or state, decisions can be made in a holistic, coherent, and collaborative fashion so that a single government is serving and is seen to be serving the public interest. In the case of Paraguay, that's the presidency, the STP, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we looked at the functioning of the center of government, and we found that notwithstanding great advances, notably in the articulation of a multi-year national development plan, the fact is that the public administration, in particular the center of government, is fragmented. We counted 22 executive secretariats reporting to the president. The fact is that this, in many countries, and we saw it in Peru, to a lesser degree we saw it in Colombia, we see it in some of the countries in the former Warsaw Pact bloc. The fact is that this saps energy and resources away from the fundamental role of the units serving the Council of Ministers and the head of government to coordinate, to make whole of government policy coherently. So that's point one. The second point is that the policy challenges that are facing the country, as in the case of all OECD countries, are increasingly complex and multidimensional. You want to design a strategy to deal with youth unemployment. It's not only about creating jobs for kids, for youth. There is a huge series of issues that need to come into play, which means that all the administrative units and ministries that play on these issues, transportation, early childhood development, daycare, support for parents, support for mothers, any number of these things need to be taken into account as you weave together collectively a policy on youth unemployment. So the multi-dimensionality of policy challenges means that there is a greater requirement on the part of governments to generate integrated, coherent policy responses to these challenges. That is invariably led by the center of government and its institutions. So governments across the OECD are adopting holistic, whole-of-government approaches to improve public sector coordination and coherence in order to optimize the design and implementation of the right mix of policies to address the challenges they face. As a result, we recommended in the PGR that Paraguay consolidate the institutional arrangements reporting to the presidency so as to enable the presidency writ large, the STP, to coordinate based on a whole-of-government approach. We recommend strengthening the institutional capacity of the center of government to design and implement strategic policy decisions, to design and implement policy with a whole-of-government focus. We laid out in the public governance review lots of options in this regard. We're not giving you a single recipe because there is none. But what we say is that in OECD countries, there are any number of options that can be looked at, but we urge you to consolidate and strengthen the coordination capacity of the COG institutions that you already have. Strengthen interinstitutional coordination between different COG units. Hacienda and the presidency and the STP and foreign affairs need to work together consistently and on an ongoing basis on common issues of strategic importance to the development of the country. And continue improving strategic planning capacity, and in this case you have made huge leaps in doing that, but continue to improve it by harnessing the results of strategic foresight. Can you determine through data and information what's going to happen to Paraguay in 30 years? Take that information, feed it in to the 5 or 10-year planning horizon that you've got. And through the greater use of strategic monitoring and evaluation. Did the expenditure, and I'll get to this in a minute, when you said in the budget that you're going to build a school, it's not so much ticking a box at the end saying, yeah, the school got built. The issue is you built the school in order to enhance educational outcomes for children over the longer term in order to ensure that these children can be employed in the areas in which they were trained, which will lead to greater job opportunities and greater economic diversification. Those are outcomes. So strategic monitoring and evaluation, led by the center, needs to be able to tell the government and tell citizens that the expenditure of public resources is in fact not only building the school, not only building the highway, not only providing potable water or electrifying rural areas, but that these contributed to greater prosperity, greater economic diversification, greater economic growth that is more inclusive. The second, which is what I've just been linking to, is the link between strategy and planning. You can have the best strategic plan on paper. It can't get implemented if resources aren't attributed to it in a rational, coherent fashion. So come back to the example of the school. The Ministry of Education, and in Paraguay through subnational mandates, is responsible for building that school. We have examples, both in Latin America and in the OECD countries, where they built the school, but they didn't build the road to it, and they didn't build sewer to it, and they didn't electrify it. That's because there was no coordination across administrative silos. That's a simplistic and caricatural example, but those examples do exist. I'm certainly not suggesting that Paraguay is doing that. I'm simply using it as an illustration. It's very important to ensure that strategic planning and the strategic objectives for the development of the country are linked to the fiscal framework. Many countries have embarked on translating the UN's Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals into national strategy. A huge challenge is ensuring that the national budgets, that the result areas under result-based budgeting are the same as the ones in the National Development Plan, which themselves reflect the Sustainable Development Goals. Easier said than done, but these are common challenges faced by OECD and OECD member and non-member countries alike, and Paraguay is in this same group. And finally, that enables you, the greater linkages between strategy and budgeting enable the government to report to itself periodically. Are we achieving the strategic development goals that we've established for the country in the National Development Plan through spending decisions? So monitor and evaluate internally, whether you're doing that as a government, but most importantly, externally. You'll be able to report to citizens. We've made progress in these areas. Here's demonstrable evidence that we have. We've not made progress in these areas, and here's why. Therefore, we need to alter course. So in this area, we make a number of recommendations. We recommend, based on practice, again, based on OECD practice, and indeed we have an OECD instrument in this area, the recommendation of the Council on Budgetary Governance, to increase the transparency of the budget design and execution process, informing citizens about the budget law, promote a consistent and responsible commitment by Congress for the budget process, link the National Development Plan with institutional and sector-based plans in ministries across the government, consolidate the reform of the Sistema de Planificación por Resultados, strengthening the framework, consolidate the framework of expenditures over the medium term, and make greater use of your newly created Fiscal Advisory Council. This was an area, this third area, regional development and strengthening the regional dimension, was a very interesting area for us because it's the first time that we saw in a country that there is in fact not the degree of national consensus on the notion that decentralization of the national government can indeed lead to regional growth and regional development. So what we say is that decentralization policies should contribute to broader regional development strategy. The reduction of regional disparities should be a priority. It's important to have adequate government capacity at the subnational level with sufficient resources to enable these to meet their new responsibilities. There should be adequate vertical coordination mechanisms between the national, departmental, and local governments, and effective monitoring systems at the central level for regional growth. We recommend a holistic and coherent integrated regional development strategy be developed, that you engage systematically with national and regional stakeholders across the country to build consensus that this is in fact useful as a means of reducing regional disparities, strengthen institutional arrangements at the national level to lead this from the center of government, strengthen the powers of departments in relation to regional development, and by so doing reconcile the contradiction in the mandate of the governor, who under the Constitution simultaneously is elected and therefore represents the interests of his or her regional citizens, but is also the representative of the state in the region. So the person gets up in the morning, looks at themselves in the mirror and say, what role am I going to play today? So it becomes, this needs to be resolved. Encourage the production of data at the subnational level. Improve management skills and capacities at the subnational level. Promote horizontal coordination between departments and municipalities where necessary. And link departmental and municipal development plans to national and departmental budgets, fiscal frameworks, and investment strategies. Strategic workforce management is key. The question is, why is it important to construct a professional and efficient public service? Social development, poverty reduction, inclusive economic growth, and international integration, all strategic objectives under the National Development Plan, cannot be achieved without a professional and efficient civil service. Professional public service can help the government meet its priorities, provide citizens with services that actually meet their needs, because you can demonstrate that those needs have been correctly identified and are being met through the professionalism, the competence, the skills of the public service, and help reduce public spending through greater efficiencies. So we recommend that the government keep going, broaden and deepen the staff management and strategic planning of the workforce, improve the hiring process for public officials based on merit, increase transparency in recruitment and remuneration and promotion, develop the compensation system by reducing pay grades and creating pay bands, and apply this uniformly across the system, and emphasize leadership through training courses in this area for managers, especially treating the senior civil service as a single community serving a single government. This echoes to the stuff, the recommendations that were made in the MDCR in health and education. The last theme is open government. We heard a lot this morning from the MDCR on health and education, where beyond fragmentation, there's very little in the way of engagement with stakeholders across the healthcare and education system. This destroys trust over time. It simply reduces trust. People wonder why, governments wonder why youth aren't voting. It's not that youth aren't interested in politics or in the political process, it's that they don't trust the system, because they don't trust the system to identify and deliver their needs. So open government is, again, a tool to engage with civil society in a way that will ensure that government policy design and delivery reflects the needs of the public interest. The OECD defines open government as a culture of governance that promotes the principles of transparency, integrity, accountability, and stakeholder participation in support of democracy and inclusive growth. It's framed by 4 fundamental principles: transparency and access to information, integrity in the fight against corruption, accountability, and stakeholder participation. So, implementing open government reforms can respond to citizens' demands for transparency, integrity, accountability, and participation. It can modernize the public administration to make it more efficient, effective, and responsive to the needs of citizens. It can improve democracy, promote inclusive growth, job creation, and welfare, whether at the national or local levels. In light of this, we recommended to strengthen open government policies and frameworks, not only at the national level, but at the departmental and municipal levels as well. The PGR recommends the creation of a single national definition of open government with all stakeholders, link open government action plans to the National Development Agenda, as the Deputy Secretary General flagged this morning in her speech, create a single national open government strategy, improve open government strategies at all levels and in all branches of the state to improve their monitoring and evaluation. To conclude, this can't be done overnight. This is a very rich and integrated agenda. No country can do all of this at once. So the first step is to identify clear priorities. You have an unparalleled opportunity in that you have an incoming government. That government can establish priorities to move forward. What are we going to do first? How are we going to do it? What kind of resources are we going to assign to it? But what we put up here on offer for you is, for your consideration, is the mix of recommendations based on OECD practices, based on what other countries do in the areas under review. And we stand ready to to accompany you over the life of your mandate to help you implement the public governance reforms that you have chosen as your priorities for this mandate. As I close, I simply wish to acknowledge the heroic work of the interpreter. I want to thank Rizzi Logan for having helped me out here. Muchísimas gracias.